Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Support Services Forum. I'm Kurt Dietrich, your superintendent. As you know, we do have a board system where we have committees, and we have a Support Services Committee that meets every month. And in the discussions about what we should be doing and how we should be arranging some priorities with our spending on maintaining our facilities and doing upgrades to our facilities, we decided that it would be helpful to have a forum where we could have a larger venue, an opportunity to do some presentations, an opportunity to take questions and some brief comment from members of the public. So that's what tonight is about. I do appreciate the size of the crowd that's here this evening at Pembroke in the auditorium. And then very importantly, we also are live on North Penn Television. And likewise, we're on Facebook Live. So we have many, many people that are tuning in through North Penn Television or through Facebook Live. We do have our board members here this evening. We have 3 members that are on the Support Services Committee who are seated up front. Namely, those are Jonathan Casa, Julianne Romick, and Tina Stoll. And we also have our other board members here in the audience to hear the input from the community regarding our support services needs. This evening we will have a brief video that will kick off in just a minute. Then we will have a presentation from Scott Kennedy. Scott is our Director of Facilities and Operations, and he will be talking about a 10-year plan that we have to maintain current facilities. He'll be talking about a variance that we were successful in getting on our stadium, and he'll introduce then Dave Schrader from the Schrader Group, who is our architect. And Dave will have a presentation on the study that was done and the architect's findings through that process, talking about NAP, talking about North Penn High School, briefly about some other needs that we have here in the district. We did have a study that looked at those 2 buildings, also looked at the ESC and at Penndale, and then what we can expect next out of that process. And then we'll turn it over to Steve Scrocchi, and he is our Chief Financial Officer, and he'll have just a brief presentation on finances. Because we do want to get to the questions that you have. We also want to have an opportunity that if you have some brief and succinct comments you'd like to make, I'll be coming around with the microphone to give you that opportunity to have the mic just briefly to ask your question. Or as I said, if you have a brief comment you'd like to make, you'd be welcome to make it. What we don't want is we don't want anyone monopolizing the time and speaking long. If you have lengthier thoughts, you can certainly send us an email. We promise that we will review those emails. We also have an opportunity then, if you're watching through North Penn Television, to submit any kinds of questions or any kinds of comments through NPTV at npenn.org. Again, that's NPTV at npenn.org. Or if you're on Facebook Live, you can submit questions that way too. We have Eric Jessberger here. Eric's in the front row with Christine Liberowski. Eric is one of our students. He's involved very much so at the high school. Sometimes you might see him on North Penn Television segments that we have. And Eric will be helping me with those questions, fielding questions and channeling those to me. So we'll take some of those from time to time also. So please, if you are watching through North Penn Television right now and you have some questions, send them in, nptv at npenn.org. Okay, with that, I think what we'll do then is we'll kick it off with a video that we have prepared, and then I'll come back up here, I'll moderate this evening, and we'll turn it over to Scott right after that. So if we could play that video.
What is a school? The Oxford Dictionary defines a school as an institution for educating children. It is also a physical structure, a place where learning takes place and friendships are formed, a community center, a place where students feel safe, safe to learn, safe to challenge, safe to ask questions. A school is a home away from home. The North Penn School District has 18 different schools that are home to nearly 13,000 students and 1,800 staff members. Our schools vary in age, from our oldest school, York Avenue Elementary, built in 1926, to our newest school, Northbridge, opened in 2007. Our schools, just like our homes, need maintenance and upgrades. Our North Penn School District Facilities Department has been diligent in keeping our buildings and grounds well maintained, just as you maintain your own home. After the construction of our 3 newest elementary schools, Gwinnett Square, which opened in 1991, and Bridle Path and Walton Farm elementary schools, which both opened in 1994, North Penn began an aggressive renovation plan. Since 1996, 15 of our buildings have been through a renovation. The needs of our facilities have changed dramatically throughout those 20 years. The renovations we completed in the mid-1990s did not always take into account today's requirements for specialized spaces where individualized and collaborative learning takes place, the impact of technology in all facets of education, or the security enhancements required in this day and age to keep our students and staff safe. During this time, in addition to renovations, capital improvements have taken place in our schools, including new roofing, a mini stadium with turf at North Penn High School, HVAC modifications, secure vestibules, office reconfigurations, and installation of full air conditioning at Gwen Norr and Oak Park Elementary Schools. Our schools need maintenance and updates just like your home. Some of those updates are items that are never seen by staff or students. HVAC automation systems, boilers, life safety systems, sprinklers, power management, and the list goes on. To address these issues, North Penn has completed a comprehensive facilities feasibility study that outlines the areas of greatest need and how we can accomplish those upgrades. As every homeowner understands, the work of maintaining your home and grounds is never done. When one project is completed, there is always another project that needs some attention. Sometimes those upgrades happen on schedule, and other times emergencies or Mother Nature prioritizes those projects for us. The North Penn School Board is committed to keeping the community informed about the challenges of meeting the needs of our students. Tonight, you will hear about that study, learn more about short and long-term needs of our facilities, and how to accomplish those projects. There's no place like home, and there's no place like North Penn. Our community, our school board, and our staff is committed to meeting the needs and challenges of education in this new century. With the right planning, foresight, and commitment, our schools will continue to be a place where community, staff, and students come together to learn, grow, and call their school home.
I'm always so impressed with the work North Penn Television does. Don't you think that was well done? I think that was really well done. We appreciate them. All right, with that as the kickoff and the intro, we're going to turn it over now to Scott Kennedy, our Director of Facilities and Operations, and Scott has probably about 10 minutes here to do a presentation. Scott, it's all yours.
As you can see from the video, North Penn School District has done a wonderful job renovating its schools over the years. Later tonight, you will hear from our architect about a few proposed renovation projects coming up. I'd like to start this evening by sharing our most recent long-range facility improvement plan. This 10-year plan will serve as a guide for repairing and maintaining our existing facilities. The long-range plan will not include the renovation projects our architect will talk about. First, I'd like to review the process and how we developed this long-range plan. The first step involved gathering data and information about our facilities. We conducted many walkthroughs through all of our schools. We sent surveys to our building principals asking them to prioritize their needs. We interviewed our building and maintenance staff who work in the buildings every day. We looked at the repair history of the equipment in our buildings, and we compared the age of our building systems to industry guidelines. On this slide, you'll see equipment life expectancies as determined by the American Society of Heating, Refrigeration, and Air Conditioning Engineers. I've listed a few of our systems, and you can see many of them have exceeded their predicted life expectancies. After identifying the needs of each of our buildings, we assigned a preliminary budget estimate to each project. These estimates were determined with either unit cost or square foot pricing based on recent bids that we've completed in the last few years, or we use some of our construction experience to determine those estimates. I'd like to point out that we did not hire a design professional to determine any of the budget estimates at this point. This is just an example of one of our schools, the projects we've identified. They consist of new boilers, new parking lots, new roofs, electrical upgrades, replacing inefficient lighting, upgrading HVAC equipment, and generators and so on. This is just one example of one of our schools. We have a similar spreadsheet for every school in the district. We're not going to go through all of them tonight, but you can see the kind of work that's required of each building. In total, we've identified a little over $63 million of work that needs to be done. Again, these are maintenance type projects, repair type projects, not renovations, and it does not address any educational initiatives. It's just maintaining our buildings. Our next steps for our long-range plan is to develop a funding plan, prioritize those projects, and assign a timeline to each of those projects. So we have some work cut out for us, but this is a roadmap for the next 10 years on how we maintain our buildings. Now I'd like to share an update on the proposed renovations to Crawford Stadium. Our design professionals identified the following improvements for Crawford Stadium. We're going to build new visitor bleachers closer to North Montco, move them back about 10 or 15 feet, create a wider playing surface to accommodate all the North Penn High School sports teams, expanding the running track to 8 lanes, providing ADA access and seating in both grandstands, installing a new press box, new LED lighting, stormwater management, and constructing new bathroom and concession spaces. Last week, we were in front of the Town of Menson Zoning Hearing Board to apply for some variances. We need to move this project forward. We were fortunate to receive those variances that night. So if we decide to move forward with this project, we can start the land development process at any time. That was good news for us. This sketch details some of the proposed improvements at the stadium. You'll see the 8-lane running track. You'll see the jump area in the bottom. Most importantly, I think you'll see the lining on the synthetic field. It accommodates boys and girls soccer, boys and girls lacrosse, field hockey, football. All of our sports can play in that field. The synthetic turf is pre-lined with all those sports on the field. This photo shows how we're going to accommodate the ADA requirements. The bleachers can load from the side. We'll have ramps on the sides, and we'll also have ramps coming in from behind the bleachers to ADA seating in the first row. That'll meet our ADA requirements, which we currently don't meet. Here's a photo of our existing press box in the upper left corner, and a photo of what the press box could look like. Obviously, you see it's much larger, a better filming area on top, a lot more space for our coaches and teams. Our design professionals prepared a preliminary cost estimate, itemizing each line, each item of the project. And as you can see, the total project cost is $5.2 million for the new stadium. Our final slide is the construction timeline. It's roughly a 20-month process, start to finish. That could be affected by the land development process, how long it takes to get through the township, and also could be affected by weather during the construction process. Now I'd like to introduce David Schrader, who will go through Knapp Elementary School, North Penn High School, Penndale Middle School, and the Educational Services Center.
Okay, good evening. I think we're flipping over the presentation here to go to the next one. So I'm David Schrader, representing an architecture firm in Philadelphia. Typically, when we get involved with a project like this, we bring a series of engineers on who are familiar with the specific systems of each type of building. So tonight I've got Jeff Machik from Snyder Hoffman sitting up front to help create a flak jacket for some of the comments that we may make as time goes on. But we also had Boucher and James who did the civil engineering work, and our own structural engineers internally did any kind of structural analysis of the buildings. So what Mr. Kennedy has just gone through, and by the way, the date on here is because we made a presentation to the Support Services Committee, so they have a sense already of what you're about to see. So when we do an analysis like this, it's done very similarly to the way that Mr. Kennedy conducted his, except it's a group of architects and engineers that go through the buildings, do a full analysis space by space, and eventually end up with a document The first part of which is about 240 pages because it goes space by space, identifies each item that needs to be done in each space, and then provides an approximate cost estimate per square foot for each of those items. And so that's that document, and then there are a series of other documents that get attached to this that talk about the other portions of the presentation that I'll be going through. So, as Scott said, we looked at Knapp Elementary, Penndale Middle, North Penn High, and the Education Services Center. And the interesting thing about this is the projects that he identified are the kinds of projects you would want to keep on each of your buildings as capital improvements to make sure that the buildings do not fall into disrepair and that the systems are kept up to reasonable date. And doing that allows you to kind of get away from a couple of the things that we may end up talking about here for at least one of the buildings that we'll be going through. So I'm going to go through a quick overview of the facility assessment, a very brief analysis of something that was much more comprehensive, and that's an analysis of the capacity to enrollment or enrollment to capacity analysis. We'll go through some draft project costs and kind of next steps here. So, in June, this team got together and started to kick off the project. In July, the buildings were empty, and so all of the architects and engineers spent a couple of weeks going through all the buildings, assessing all of the specifics in each facility. And then they come back in August and spend the time documenting and preparing the document that I have in my hand that I know that will be available at some point in the very near future. And then we spent time with administration in September and October going back and forth on what was in the document so they got a good sense of what was happening as well. And so here we are in November with the community forum, which is great. And the intent is to take all of this and kind of bind it into one big document by January of 2019. So that will be available as well for use. The facility assessment as a whole. So when the architects and engineers go through the buildings, they would look at the building, for example, the one that we're in, identify the systems that needed to be upgraded. So in the case of the auditorium you're in, perhaps it's the HVAC systems, perhaps it's the lighting systems, maybe the flooring was in need of repair at that time and the ceiling system was in need of repair as well. So they'll identify every single piece of that, and typically when you do that kind of work, you're also upgrading paint to make sure that the paint is new in the building as well. So you take the space that you're in and you return it to today's version of what it should be with all new systems. You're not modifying any of the educational use, you're not adding for capacity, you're just returning the building to the condition that it was in when you built it new with today's systems. So the intent of this is only that. The first numbers that you're going to see, and they're big numbers, have to do only with returning the building to the condition that it was the day that it was opened. So we'll start out with Knapp and talk about each of the systems types. Now, this is an extremely condensed version of this, so to get into this further, we could go space by space. But typically what you'll find is that on the site itself, there's a need for ADA upgrades, and as time has gone on, the buildings have not kept up with the Americans with Disability guidelines, and so you typically have to, when you do a full renovation, you have to bring the building up to that capability. I'm going to go into it a little bit with this building, but then you'll hear each of the other buildings have very similar system needs, and so we'll get into that. There are some paving failure areas, so there's a cost in there for paving replacement. Many of these buildings built during the eras that these were built had no stormwater management. And so the rainwater, and we all know how the rain has affected all of us, particularly this year, but the rainwater on these sites was handled merely by the hope that it would infiltrate into the ground. We have much higher requirements now that we have to actually capture all of the stormwater on site, and it actually all has to be made somehow to drain back into the ground around. So this would be the drainage to correct the ponding water that you would see on any of these sites. There's typically, after a number of years of a building like this, repair for concrete curbing and sidewalks, and at Knapp there was identified the need to create a secondary access drive to the site. So we had separate bus and car drop-off. The building, the right-hand corner here, the same goes for the site that goes for the building, and that you typically have to do ADA upgrades, American with Disability. There is a need for roofing repair on that facility. You would typically replace all windows and doors on a facility of that age. There are some masonry joint sealants to be replaced so you don't start to see decay of the masonry walls. You would replace the finishes throughout the building and create a security vestibule and office sequence. So I'm going to step into Jeff's realm here and just talk briefly about the systems. So electrical and lighting, you would typically replace all of the lighting, both inside and outside. And what you get, number one, is much better lighting, but number two, quite a bit of cost savings because of the upgrade to all of the LED lighting systems that you'd replace with. The buildings of this era did not have the capability of handling the technology that you have in the buildings today. And so much of what you end up doing as a result of that is replacing a lot of the power distribution system throughout the building. So anytime a teacher has come to you and said, I can only find one outlet in the room, those are the kinds of things that get upgraded because code has added to the quantity of outlets that you have to have through a building. Interesting for NAP was the need to potentially create a full building generator. So not just life safety upgrades to the generator, but also a full building generator because that building apparently has some challenges with being brought back online after any of the power outages in the area. So the hope was that you could put a full building generator into that to get the building up and running when the power in the area has gone down. So there's a fairly significant cost for that. And again, as the board and the district get into these discussions, they can kind of backtrack on some of that if they feel it's important, or they can maintain that as a concept. But there's a price there to accommodate that. Heating, ventilating, and air conditioning, we would replace much of the HVAC equipment in that building. I think that's original, Jeff, right? The systems throughout? So portion's been upgraded, a portion is not. The hot water plant and boilers would be replaced. You provide air conditioning throughout, and dehumidification as well, and you've seen the stories about, throughout the state actually, about the challenges of not having dehumidification this year, particularly with the heavy rains. You'd also have HVAC control systems throughout the building. So just to move on to the other parts of that, plumbing and fire protection, quite a bit of the savings that you see in water use today is through low-flow fixtures. In addition to that, you have to also upgrade all the toilet fixtures to American with Disability Acts. There'd be the intent to try to upgrade the drainage systems, provide high-efficiency gas-fired boilers, and a fire protection system through the building. Safety and security, we are attempting these days to increase closed-circuit TV quantities so that you have better closed-circuit TVs around the building as well as night vision. Replace the fire alarm system to bring it up to current code standards and replace all safety and security. And then technology, basically bring the building up to today's standards. So in essence, you'd be taking that plan and you would be keeping it as it is, but improving all of the systems through the building. So when you walked in, you felt like you had new finishes, new envelope to the building, and then new systems. So just to do that, without any replacement, without any changes to modulars, for instance, this does not, by the way, include costs to upgrade the modular or trailers, as you might call them, in the back of the building or around the building. Construction costs to do that is in the neighborhood of $15 million. And one of the challenges when they go through and they do this analysis is they're assigning actual dollars per square feet. They get tallied up and they add to these $550 numbers. The reality is it is not going to be $15,169,550. It's a $15 to $16 million project. In addition to that, there are quite a few costs that go along with a project like this. There are all of the fees that go along with it. There are all the permitting costs that go along with a project like that. Typically, when you do a full building project like this, you would also want to try to bring the furniture up to current standards. That typically, all of those things get included in something we call a soft cost. And it very generally runs around 30% of the project cost. So all in, for the district to fund a project like that, it would be in the neighborhood of $19 to $20 million. And you still haven't taken care of upgrading the modulars or replacing the classrooms that the modulars are currently in should you want to pull the modulars off the site. So just keep that in mind. That's just to bring it up to speed the way that it is. A little bit more significant in the middle school project, much more square footage to accommodate, and so with more square footage comes more cost. Same kinds of deals though. The site, the building, the electrical, lighting, and the HVAC, you're in the same situation except the HVAC system, you replace most of that system in it. In addition to that, you would be under the building categories here. The exterior of the building is currently coded with something called an exterior insulation finishing system, or EIFS. So the goal here would be to do something with that system to try to upgrade it a little bit and repair it and paint it. So that's what that's reflecting in that building cost. Under the system, same kind of concerns with the plumbing and fire protection, safety and security, and technology. So again, you're doing the same kinds of things to this building. However, you are not, you're obviously not modifying any of the educational space within the building. You're just turning it into a new version of what it is. And so the construction cost for that square footage is in the neighborhood of $34 to $35 million. With soft costs, you're at $45 million to upgrade a building like that. So the goal of all of these is to give you the costs of what you either might do over the next 10 years to make sure that none of the systems fail, or what you might do as one whole project to try to make sure that that building's all brought up to speed at one time. So those are two ways to handle it. A lot of times when we look at a project like this, however, we like to do it all at once. So the contractors are mobilized once, and you don't pay for the various contractors remobilizing on the site over and over. And also you don't have students living through 10 years of repair this, replace that, repair this, replace that. So that's the thought behind that. High school is quite a bit more significant. So you have such a variety of systems in that building at this time. You have such a variety of finishes. As you know, you've got, of course, the newer facade, the newer front to the building, and then you've got the older pods in the back of the structure. So again, the same kinds of situations here. And I should add that we, in the case of NAP, in the case of the middle school, in the case of the high school, we actually looked at maintaining the generator as a full building generator just to give you that cost. So any of these buildings could be run in their entirety off of a generator. However, you can step that down and scale that back from these costs. It's just in there so you know what the greater ramification might be. There's a huge range, though. To put the system into NAP, I think it's somewhere in the neighborhood of $400,000 worth of generator. To put it into the high school, because of the square footage and all of the technology, it's around $4 million worth of generator. So it's an amazing spread of costs, and the district will have to really think about that as they decide how they want to go down the emergency generator route here. So same things with the site, the building, the electrical, lighting, and HVAC. It does not include any of the things that Scott was going to do through the stadium work, so that is a separate number from these. However, this is all of the building and the balance of the site around it. So this is probably the one that'll suck the air out of the room. The number is very large to do all of the things here. And in this case, the construction cost for that, and remember this is about a 550,000 square foot building. It's over 500,000 square feet. It's in the neighborhood of $106 million to do that. All in, that cost is in the neighborhood of $138 million. So these are very large numbers to look at. And again, either you are taking these systems and you're replacing them annually, you're looking at some kind of capital improvement program like Scott talked about, or you go ahead and you do the whole thing all at once. Realize that as you spread these projects out, there are obviously escalation factors to each of them because each year every system becomes more and more expensive by 3 to 5% depending on the inflation rate. So that's those buildings. We also did a quick analysis of the ESC. And the ESC, we looked at a little bit less in terms of the kinds of systems that were worked through here. However, it was replacement of all the same kinds of systems with the exception that the roofing system was just replaced 2 years ago. So that's a pretty big reduction in cost compared to the other buildings because a roof is a pretty important part of the structure. The heating, ventilating, air conditioning system, we were talking about replacing that in its entirety. In the case of that building, the generator that we were going to do was more the life safety side of things. So in other words, when the power goes out, it'll maintain the emergency lighting system that needs to be on. It'll keep any of the servers on that need to keep running, but the balance of the building will turn off. And so that's what I mean when I say life safety systems on the generator system. So plumbing and fire protection reduced a little bit, but you'll still end up doing a lot of your ADA upgrades and replacements and so on. So the construction costs for the ESC were around $4 million with soft costs. The total concept is in the neighborhood of $5 million to do the upgrades to that building. So quite a bit less than the others. So that in general is a very short synopsis of a lot of pages worth of facility assessment. And the next part that I'll talk about briefly is an extremely condensed analysis of what our overall enrollment projection analysis was. So the interesting thing about this is you guys have been following the Montgomery County Planning Commission analysis here, which has been talking to increases or maintenance of the folks who live in the district and the students who attend the buildings. And so we have a pretty good assessment of how many kids will be coming to the various buildings. So the analysis in its very shortened version talks to whether the buildings will actually accommodate today's population and will accommodate the future population. So in the case of NAP, we do two things here. The first thing is we try to right size the structure. And so when NAP was opened, it had X capacity. So it had classrooms that were designed to accommodate X number of students. Over time, as your educational programs have grown and as the state has mandated different programs and our learning support programs have grown and our special education programs have grown, this is just the nature of how school is today, what has happened is all of the storage areas and all of the closets have become either educational spaces or have been changed to something else. And so the interesting thing is we go back to the building plan and we try to pull the spaces out of those, reassign those back to classrooms, and ultimately what happens is you get reduced quantity of classrooms over what you think you have today. That building is compounded a little bit by the fact that you have modulars or trailer classrooms there, and if you try to pull the modulars out there, that building ends up at about 120% of capacity. We try to operate elementary schools in the neighborhood of 90% capacity, because ultimately you'll never have 25 students times 20 classrooms. The math never works out perfectly. You'll have rooms that have 23 in them, you'll have rooms that have 27 in them, you'll have grade structures where you end up with one odd classroom that has 16 students. It's just the nature of how you assign a building. So we try to program elementary schools at about 90% capacity. That's at 120%, so you can see that there's a need for additions at that building. The good news about Penndale Middle School and North Penn High School is both today's capacity is met, today's enrollment need is met, and the future enrollment need that we're seeing through the Montgomery County Planning Commission at least 5 to 10 years out is met in those buildings as well. So it's only NAP that really has the true requirement for the additional space at the moment. So given that, and again, that's the short version, there are lots of charts that go with that. We wanted to just talk about a couple of things that may affect the district's ultimate choices in terms of draft project costs. So one of the things that was given to us was a little challenge to say, what does 21st century learning mean? What does the next generation of learning mean? And so we've done a little bit of research into what has created the different types of spaces that you might see in a building that would be built today or tomorrow. And the learning that we all know about, and I'm going to start at the top, and the little images on the left-hand side actually will reflect the different types of learning. There's traditional instruction, the way that I'm talking to you and the way that I'm teaching, or if I were a teacher right now, I'd be teaching to you. You're listening to me, you're hopefully absorbing a little bit of what I'm saying, and then you study and take a test. Then there's also one-on-one needs in education, and more as learning support programs have come into the buildings, that has become a greater and greater need that was not recognized earlier when these buildings were typically put together. The big change today is so many of your students and my kids are now doing research and investigation that helps to enhance the kind of learning process that they're actually achieving in the classroom itself. And this was reflected a little bit in the video that you saw at the beginning. So they research, investigate, Then there's the next concept, which is to make and develop. And all of us have heard of the STEM and the STEAM movement and how that's affecting the hands-on approach to learning for all of those who really need to be tactful learners, people who want to touch things. Once you've done all of that, then there's a need to present and report out. And so what's happening a lot in facilities today, and if you go through some of the newest buildings that are out there, you'll see that all of these spaces have spaces, or all of these needs have spaces shaped around them. And the last part is another thing that I heard reflected in that video at the beginning, which was community spaces. In these buildings, you're sitting here because you're the community and you're in a community building. So this is so critical to these buildings. The space type that's reflected for each of these is on the right-hand side. So one of the buildings that's been recently built around you is in Phoenixville. There's a Phoenixville Early Learning Center, Phoenixville Manavon Elementary. They're two buildings merged into one, and it happens to have all of the spaces that reflect those different types of learning styles. In the plan, I won't get into the plan itself, but the way that those spaces look, first, multiple size learning spaces. And so what that means is you've got the general instruction space, and a lot of what seems to be happening, and I don't want to pretend I'm an educator. I'm one of the people who molds the spaces around what the educators say they want to do. There's the need to be able to try to push in with a lot of the services now. So learning support programs, some of the special ed programs are often getting pushed into the room, and we're trying to find a space in the room or around the room to do that work with the individual student. So what you start to see is on the right-hand side of that image, you're seeing a small group instruction space directly attached to the classroom space. And so that's one of the multiple size instructional space concepts that's out there. A second concept is the small group workspaces. In that building in Phoenixville, the corridor area has become and has been built into small group instruction spaces. So if you want to pull the child out for any kind of special testing or any kind of other remedial work of any sort, you've got that space out in the hallway to do that. Third one is this concept of resource spaces that are kind of melded with the media centers. And so they're becoming as much technology space as they are circulation space, as they are the book space. So that kind of space is becoming a heart of a building and becoming a very central part to whatever the facility is. So the research is right at the center. The next part is project areas, and the intent there is that you can pull a group of students out or groups of students out from several rooms, put them together so that they can work on various projects that are putting a lot of the subjects together. So we're reading about something, we're writing a report about it, we're doing a PowerPoint presentation about it, and then we're building a model about it. Those things are the project-based things that are going on based on the research that they've just done, which is part of the hands-on learning. And then the last part of that is presenting. So a lot of the new buildings that are being built right now have some combination of some of these spaces in them. And it's worth taking a look at some of them yourselves to see how the students are using them, because that's key. You don't put these spaces in unless you're going to use them. And so you have to meld your educational style and then mold the building around that. So the last part of that are the full-size activity areas. A lot of the elementaries that are getting built today, because they are neighborhood centers, are going to a full-size gymnasium so that you've got the middle school size 85-foot court for full basketball used by all kinds of different programs. So that's just a little summary of what we see in the elementary world. And you have to kind of look at NAP and say, well, where could you infuse a couple of those ideas into this building? And then the second part of that is, how do I get the 10 classrooms worth of space that I need to get onto this to replace the modulars and to right-size the building? So there's a couple of levels of looking at NAP that I think is the board and the administration's challenge next with that building, above and beyond that $15 million that I talked about. So in NAP, on the site, we know that we've got to deal with some of the site-related work, but we also have opportunities to look at different levels of construction there. And these are interesting slides because you are either doing the work to bring the building up to what it is, or you take advantage of this moment that you have to do something else. And I think that's the way folks are looking at it, that that's kind of the span of opportunities that you have, and you have to decide which end you want to go on. This costing here is merely built around the idea of Option 1 is what it would cost you to do that $15 or $16 million worth of renovation work to the building itself, and then just add the classroom structures, the square footage that you need to replace the modulars. So to do that, you're already at $28 to $30 million. It's amazing how quickly these numbers go up or down. They always go up. That's the unfortunate part of that. The second one is trying to find a way in that floor plan to infuse some of those ideas that we just talked about. And in a building like this, the concept would be that you'd probably take a few of the classrooms out on the left-hand side to create something a little bit more like what you have on the right-hand side, so you can get some small group instruction spaces to allow that pull-out and push-in concept. And then you still have to add the square footage that you need and likely upgrade the cafeteria, upgrade all the systems in there and so on to add a little bit more square footage to that. So all of that starts to come to this point where to do that, option 2 for renovations and a full addition are in the $38 to $40 million range. And just to give you a sense of where these numbers came from, again, in each case, it's the $16 million worth of construction work to bring the building up to speed, plus a certain amount at something like $150 a square foot to renovate, modify the building, and alter it to do a couple of these things in it. And then it's in the neighborhood of $225 to $250 a square foot to add the construction. And if you look at construction today, it's going for about that $225 to $250 a square foot. The last version is looking at the idea that how do I make the structure in that existing NAP building work to make some of those spaces that you just saw on those slides. And if that's a desire of the districts, and again, this is something the district has to decide, maybe it's better off building a new building. And so we had to do the analysis of what is new construction cost to do all of that versus what does it cost to do additions, renovations, and alterations to make the building do that. And so that's that difference of 38 to 40 million versus 42 to 44 million. So that, I'm sure, will bring a lot of conversation as we bring this to a close in a couple more slides here. The middle schools are much the same. You'll see a lot of the same concepts today. Maybe the difference between what you see today and what you're seeing currently at your middle school is at Pendel, you might end up seeing a desire to try to create commons areas in the middle of a group of classrooms. And that commons area becomes the project area for that team. So the buildings set up as teams, you'll tend to try to, you can see the gray area in the center of this, that's a project area around which all of the different subjects work, and they come together to create the projects from all of those subjects melded together. So in the case of a Pendel Middle School, you'd probably remove strategic classrooms around and try to create these groupings of classrooms around those workspaces, and so you would lose a few of the classrooms if you tried to do that. All of the spaces you see depicted in the photographs are the kinds of spaces that students are using today in the newer buildings for middle schools. So in Pendel, as we were saying, you might try to go around that racetrack concept and pull out a few classrooms and turn them into project spaces and then group your teams of classrooms around those. So at that building, we looked at two different things. So the first thing is administration has already begun to try to anticipate where projects might fall on the whole spectrum. And I can tell you that initially here, the intent was to attack the NAP project first. And so the escalation factor in that building is built around construction to a midpoint next year, towards the end of the year, something like that, in anticipation that you might want to get going on that one early. The second one in the span was actually the high school, because at least the administration's concept is that that's probably the one that's most desirable to get moving more quickly than Pendel Middle School. And so that is escalated to 7 years out. And Pendel Middle School, the numbers that we gave you are construction numbers today, as if they were being bid today, meaning they're to the midpoint of next year. If you put that project off for 10 years, then you've got escalation to 2027. And so suddenly that $45 to $47 million cost 10 years from now at 3% escalation a year, and that's hoping that escalation stays at that rate, would be around 59 to 61 million. If you tried to do this concept of collaborative spaces throughout the building and started to try to frame that building a little bit more like that diagram I showed you, you could anticipate a project that might be as high as $75 million at Penndale. So the questions there are, do you do just the basic renovations and go with the number up at the top of the slide, or do you do a little bit more there and go to the numbers at the bottom? So again, a range just so you have an idea of what the different things that might be done at that building are. And then last, in the high school designs, what we see and what we are seeing is a move towards specifically large commons area. And the commons areas are kind of a takeaway from the higher ed world. And everything kind of drifts from the higher ed world slowly down into the K-12 world. So the common structure there is larger dining spaces that are used all day long because they're combined with the media resource areas. And it becomes the giant Borders bookstore of the school, or the giant Starbucks of the school, just to kind of give you an idea of how these are used, because students will move in and out of them throughout the day, and both the food and the resources are available as they see fit. So you'll see that in newer high schools. Then you also have these STEAM or STEM research centers, team rooms, learning and presentation areas, and project areas. So these are all the things that you start to see there, and they create a range of possibilities for the high school as well. One of the things that we see as a positive to the high school plan, when you renovate a project like this, a lot of those pod centers where you have lecture halls could very easily be converted to these project areas, and then you just have all of the resources for the different classroom structures feeding into that. So we looked at a baseline model of what's the escalated cost for that $138 million number. Then we looked at a renovation and alteration to try to turn these into project-based areas. And then we also said what would happen if you got rid of something like the art pod and instead you created a new structure in a small area of the building to try to bring in a little bit stronger STEM or STEAM enhanced programs. So using that site plan, these are the three different options there. And again, it's a big range for people to discuss further. Again, this is the first time any of you have seen this. Your support services group just saw it a week and a half ago, so you're all pretty much on the same line here. Option one is the renovations per that facility assessment. In 2024, that $138 to $140 million turns into $165 to $167. It's 3% escalation a year. The option two, where you renovate and you do space conversion within, in 2024 would be about a $175 million project, and if you did some new construction somewhere in the neighborhood of 10,000 square feet, it would add another $1 million or $2 million to the overall project. So it's a pretty big range also. It's also a very big number, and I realize that. We're always amazed when we compile all those costs and they tally at the end and you see the number and you're always taken aback, so I'm sure it did the same thing to all of you. I'll just say from here, I'm going to hand it off to Steve Scrocchi in a second here. The intent here, as we said, is to go have these meetings with you folks, and then we're going to go ahead and assemble a final study and presentation with all of this and all of this done graphically. It will also have all of the enrollment to projection analysis so you get a good sense of how that came about. So I hope that's decent information to start the concept and discussion. And Steve, it's all yours.
Good evening, everyone. Hope everyone's doing well tonight. We saved the best for last, the finances, right? We're going to talk about how we could possibly fund all these projects that were presented. So thank you to Scott and David for your outstanding presentations. So tonight I'd like to cover a couple topics. First off, we want to talk about the school district funds in particular, a couple different funds that we have. We'll also talk about a brief overview of the school district's budget, talk about project financing, how we financed some projects in the past, how we might finance some projects moving forward, talk about the school district's current debt schedule, and then finally, what might be the biggest question of all, how will this impact me as a homeowner if the school district decides to move forward with some of these projects? So first off, I'd like to talk about the two primary funds of the school district. We have the general fund, which is the main operating fund of the school district, and the capital reserve fund. Each of these funds will play a role in the possible renovations of the high school and Napa Elementary School in particular. So to start off with the general fund, this is our main operating budget of the school district. This is the largest fund of the school district. North Penn has a $260.2 million budget, so it's a pretty large budget. In fact, I think with the most recent statewide data, North Penn is 6th in the state in terms of the size of its budget. So it's a very large operation. And I tried to carve out the budget into three simple slices of the pie. And the largest slice, as you might imagine, is salary and benefits for our employees. North Penn is a big operation, and we have over 2,000 full and part-time employees in the school district. And along with that comes a pretty significant chunk of our budget in salary and benefits. So it's about 78% of the total budget is in personnel costs, which makes sense because the school district is a personnel-based or service-based organization. Now, with that 78%, including benefits, benefits includes things like health care insurance, pension benefits, medical benefits, unemployment compensation, our share of Social Security, things like that, payroll taxes, plus the gross salaries that are paid. Debt is something we'll talk about in a couple minutes. That represents about 6% of our entire budget. This is the repayment for some of our prior projects. We saw some of the prior projects in the beginning video of tonight's presentation, and those projects were financed with debt. I'll get into the details of those, but that represents about 6% of our budget. And everything else is about 16% of the budget. So if you stipulate for the moment that salaries are fixed, if you have a set level of staffing and you have to repay your debt, your mortgage, so to speak, that represents 84% of the budget. So 84% of the budget is pretty much set when you come up to a new fiscal year. Now, the rest of the 16%, a lot of that is fixed also. Included in that 16% would include things like our transportation services, include things like the lights, the heating, the energy costs in a building, supplies, textbooks, equipment. So all that is wrapped up in that 16%. So $260.2 million budget. That's the money the district spends, the expenditure budget. The other side of the budget equation in the general fund is the revenue budget. This is the money the school district brings in. And that can be broken into about 4 slices of the pie. The largest piece, unfortunately, stems from real estate taxes. 68% of all the money brought into the school district comes from local property taxes. That's from residential properties, that's from commercial properties, industrial properties. One thing here at North Penn School District, we are blessed with a pretty large base of commercial and industrial properties. That helps alleviate the taxes for the residential properties. So we are fortunate in that regard. Now, in the eyes of the state, North Penn is considered a very affluent school district, primarily because of that large commercial tax base that we do have. So our state revenue that we receive in the form of various subsidies, that ranges from our basic education subsidy to our special education subsidy. We have a retirement subsidy, transportation subsidy. That represents about 20% of our overall budget. So to compare that to other districts statewide, we're at 20% here at North Penn. I think the statewide average is somewhere around 33%. So we have a reduced reliance here at North Penn in terms of state subsidies than most other school districts in the Commonwealth. Again, that's primarily due to the fact that we're considered an affluent school district in the eyes of the state. Federal revenue is only 1% of our budget, and everything else is about 11%. That everything else 11% figure, most of that comes from local sources though also. For example, if you're employed, you probably have a 1% local tax deducted from your paycheck. That's called the earned income tax. Well, North Penn School District receives half of that 1%. So 1/2 of that 1% actually comes to North Penn School District in the form of that earned income tax. We collect about $16.7 million a year in that earned income tax. So that's another significant portion of our budget that I threw into the all other category. So again, to sum up the income coming into the school district in the general fund, $257.5 million. So if you were following the two numbers on the expenditure side and the revenue side, you'll note that we spend more money than we bring in. Not necessarily a good equation. That's called a budget imbalance or a budget deficit. And for the current fiscal year, North Penn is budgeted to spend $2.7 million more than we will bring in. So you might be thinking, well, how is that possible? In my household budget, I can't spend more money than I bring in. Well, it's possible if you have savings, and I'll talk about savings in a little bit. The school district does have a savings account that we can rely on to help bridge the gap when there are deficits. I alluded earlier to the level of taxation in North Penn School District, and I talked about our commercial tax base. So I'd like to share with you some of the information about our tax rate here in North Penn School District. The tax rate is also referred to as the millage rate. So in North Penn School District, our millage rate is about 25.5 mils. And the county average is actually close to 32 mils in the county. There's 21 school districts in Montgomery County. So North Penn, we are the 5th lowest in terms of total taxes, our millage rate, out of the 21 school districts in Montgomery County. So I think we can be proud of that. The board, I know, is certainly proud of that number. We are 23% below the countywide average in taxes. And again, that's primarily due to the fact that we are blessed with a large commercial tax base here in North Penn School District. Okay, so a moment ago I talked about the budget imbalance we have for the current fiscal year. And I mentioned that the way a district can pay for a budget imbalance is through savings. So this chart illustrates the savings in North Penn School District. Savings for a school district is referred to as fund balance. That's the technical term for school district savings. So at North Penn School District, our total fund balance is about $40 million total through the end of last fiscal year. And that's carved out into two sections. One piece is slightly over $20 million. That's called the unassigned piece. That can be used for any purpose whatsoever. So if there's a budget imbalance in one year, that $20 million can be applied towards the budget imbalance. And then the remaining piece is slightly under $20 million. And that piece of the fund balance is what's called committed or assigned fund balance. And basically what that money is, it's money that's been carved out, even though it's in savings. It's being carved out to be used for future pension increases. You may have heard some news the past couple of years about the huge increases in the pension obligations that school districts have been facing. So we do have money carved out for future pension increases, as well as money that's carved out for future medical expenses, for health care increases. So that money is kind of set aside. So although we do have $40 million technically on the books, there's really $20 million out of that 40 that is flexible, can be used for any purpose. So when you have a budget imbalance, that $2.7 million, that's okay if it's a one-time imbalance. But you can't keep tapping the savings account year after year after year, because what will happen? What will happen in your household if you constantly spend more money than you bring in? You'll run out of money, right? At some point you'll run out of money. So we have to be careful and manage that fund balance in a way that provides a nice reserve for the school district, but we also have to be careful not to spend that down to low levels. Now, at North Penn, with that $40 million, that represents roughly, rounded, about 16% of our total operating expenses, 16%. That's a fairly healthy number. We're very comfortable with that 16% figure. Okay, I'd like to move on now to a second separate fund the school district has, and it's called the Capital Reserve Fund. And this also plays a role in our potential building renovations. So the Capital Reserve Fund is really made up of three particular uses. This is defined by Pennsylvania Department of Education. There's three uses for the Capital Reserve Fund. And as you would imagine by the name, the one use is for capital improvements. So that could be a building renovation or an upgrade to a building. Or it could be a maintenance project in a building. Or finally, this one's kind of odd, but the third use for Capital Reserve is the purchase of school buses. So not necessarily in my mind a capital project, but nonetheless that's one of the authorized uses out of the Capital Reserve Fund. Now, it's important to note, once money is in the Capital Reserve Fund, you can't move it out. It can't be moved back to the general fund for general operating purposes. So we can move money from our general fund to the Capital Reserve Fund, but you can't move it back. You can't move it back. And this year, our board did authorize a transfer of money from the general fund to the Capital Reserve Fund of roughly $3.7 million. So with that transfer, the school district has about $6.5 million in the Capital Reserve Fund right now. That's completely unallocated, not designated for any project. Okay, $6.5 million. When Mr. Kennedy presented the information about the stadium project, if you remember what that number was, it was about $5.2 million estimate for the stadium project. So if that stadium would to move forward, if the board would authorize the stadium project, money is available without any additional borrowing to pay for a stadium project through the Capital Reserve Fund of $6.5 million. And would still leave money left over for other projects in the pipeline. For example, we're looking to upgrade the PA system at the high school. Okay, so that estimate might be somewhere in the neighborhood of $500,000 to $750,000. That would also come from the Capital Reserve Fund. So my point here is there is enough money right now in unallocated funds in the Capital Reserve Fund to pay for the stadium project should that project move forward. Okay, so now let's talk a little bit about how a project is financed, how you pay for a construction renovation project. Mr. Schrader presented some options, and some of those numbers were quite large. So there's really three methodologies or three mechanisms to pay for a building project: cash reserves, capital reserve, or municipal bonds. And typically, school districts will use the third item on that chart to pay for a project, municipal bonds. Typically, schools don't have $175 million sitting around to pay for a high school project in cash or in capital reserve, so they finance it. They finance it through municipal bonds. And municipal bonds are, you can draw a parallel between municipal bonds and your home mortgage. So your home mortgage, you probably had an option when you went to obtain your mortgage. You could have a variable rate mortgage or a fixed rate mortgage. You have the same option with municipal bonds. In North Penn does not have any variable rate mortgage. Everything we have on our books right now is fixed debt. All the bonds were at a fixed interest rate for the life of the bond. Also in the past, up until this past year, all the borrowings were for 10 years. I'll show you that in a chart in a minute. But a home mortgage could be 30 years, 20 years, 15 years, the same with a bond issue. A bond issue could be 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, 30 years. Probably the most common length for a bond issue is 20 years. North Penn's length historically has been 10 years. That 10 years is a good thing because the shorter the term of the borrowing, the lower the interest cost, the lower the interest expense. One disparity between a municipal bond and a mortgage: when you pay your mortgage, you pay principal and interest every month. When you pay back a municipal bond, you pay interest twice a year and you pay principal once a year. Municipal bonds are also tax exempt. Okay, so the school district pays no taxes on these bonds, and if you're an investor in these bonds, you pay no federal, state, or local tax on these bonds either. So somebody could actually go out and buy a North Penn bond on the market, and they are called triple tax exempt bonds because the individual would pay no interest expense or no taxes on that interest that's earned. Now, when we go out and actually look to borrow money through municipal debt, through a municipal bond, it's really important that we get what's called a bond rating. North Penn School Districts works with Moody's. That's one of the rating agencies. The other rating agencies is called S&P. And Moody's assigns a risk rating, basically, based on our bonds. And that risk rating is basically to determine North Penn's ability to repay those bonds. How risky is North Penn School District? Does it have the capability to repay the individuals that are buying our bonds? So to do that, they assign a rating. The higher the rating, the less the risk, the lower the interest expense the school district pays. The highest rating is a AAA rating by Moody's, and North Penn School District is one notch away from that highest rating. North Penn School District is a AA1 rating, and we are in pretty elite company in Pennsylvania in terms of school districts. There are only 19 school districts in Pennsylvania that have a AA1 rating or higher. I think there are 7 school districts that have a AAA rating. There's 12 school districts that have a AA1 rating. We are one of those districts with a AA1. That's quite impressive. So let's talk about the financing for previous projects in terms of the outstanding debt that's in the books right now for North Penn School District. So I mentioned earlier, like a mortgage, there's principal and interest that pertains to outstanding bonds. So in North Penn School District right now, we have about $102 million in outstanding principal and about $18 million in outstanding interest. So total outstanding debt right now, without any additional borrowings, is about $120 million. And our repayment schedule is illustrated here to show you that basically over the next couple of years, we're going to see a decline in the amount of debt repayment that we have. So for the current fiscal year, we have about $15 million in total payments that we need to make for our bond issues, our previous bond issues. And that amount will go down over the next couple of years. In fact, in 2 years, the amount will go down from about $15 million down to a little bit over $13.9 million and then down to $11 million. So this chart makes it clear that there is flexibility built into our current debt schedule for future borrowings if that's the direction we choose to go. Okay, so now I want to preface the next couple charts by stating that Mr. Schrader presented a couple different options. I think there were 3 options for Knapp Elementary School that had a different price tag attached to it, 3 options for the high school. We also identified that those 2 buildings, in all likelihood, even though no decisions have yet been made by the board, but in all likelihood, those may be the next 2 projects we're looking at. So to try to frame what the borrowing might look like for a Knapp project and a high school project, I took the highest cost option, so I'm trying to paint a worst case scenario, took a look at the highest cost option for both Knapp Elementary School, in that case it was about $42 million, that was a new building, and for the high school, with that escalated, it was roughly $174 million. So I'm using those figures for the remaining slides. So when I talk about tax impact to the homeowner, when I talk about future borrowing, what that debt schedule looks like, it's all predicated on that option. We could go through probably 9 or 10 different iterations, but I wanted to portray what we feel is the worst case option in terms of the biggest cost. Okay, so this is the possible debt schedule if the school district would borrow for Knapp Elementary School and for the high school. So the yellow bars are the charts, represent the charts, the years that I showed in the previous slide. That's our existing debt service. So we've been working with our financial advisors called PFM, Public Finance Management, actually over the last several months to try to develop a number of borrowing scenarios that would minimize the cost of the school district, taking a look at our current debt schedule. So with a borrowing of $216 million between Knapp and the high school, we are looking at borrowings probably between now and the year 2026 if those 2 projects will move forward at varying amounts each year. But you can see with the blue chart, the blue bars, our debt service would increase from the roughly $15 million at the present time up to a high of about $20 million. And it would stay at $20 million out to the year 2040, 2041 to repay that debt. So it is a significant amount of debt, and there is a repayment schedule, not of 10 years like we've done in the past, because 10 years just wouldn't fit into the budget. It's very difficult to absorb that amount of debt with a 10-year borrowing. So we are looking at 15-year borrowings moving forward, stretched out through the 2040, 2041 year with 9 years, 8 to 9 years of borrowings. That would take the outstanding debt. The current debt right now in the school district I mentioned is $120 million, and that would take the total debt, that's principal and interest outstanding, to roughly $440 million under that scenario. Okay, so it would almost quadruple the amount of outstanding debt the school district has for those 2 projects. So now let's talk about the homeowner impact under that worst case scenario. And I want to point out once again is we're really in the first inning of having discussions about not only these projects, but how to finance these projects as well. There'll be monthly discussions with our Finance Committee and Support Services Committee to best match up a borrowing schedule with the intent of these projects as these projects are further refined. So the homeowner impact, again, under what I'm portraying as a worst case scenario, we took a look at the average assessed value, or the median assessed value, I should say, in North Penn School District for a residential property is roughly $148,000. That's the median assessed value for a homestead in North Penn School District. So based on that amount, and based on that debt schedule I previously shared, the total amount, the cumulative amount of additional taxes that taxpayer would pay over a 22-year period would be an additional $2,084. Now that doesn't count the rest of the tax bill. This is strictly for the additional debt, strictly for the additional debt. And I also modeled it at other assessed values of homes in North Penn School District. Starting at a $50,000 assessed value, that property owner over a 22-year period would pay an additional $704 in taxes, and a property assessed at $300,000 would pay $4,200 in additional taxes during that 22-year period. Keep in mind again, this isn't $4,200 in 1 year. That's the total amount of extra tax paid over a 22-year period to pay for the new debt for Knapp Elementary School and the high school. Okay, with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Dr. Dietrich. I think we're going to start with questions.
Okay, a big thank you to our presenters. They presented a lot of material in a hurry. I know we are getting questions through social media, through Facebook, through North Penn Television at npenn.org. We're going to be able to take some of those questions. I'm sure there are folks here in the audience this evening that also have questions. You also may want to make some very brief comments. We're running a little behind what we thought we would be in terms of our presentation time. We were originally thinking we would go till 8:30. We might be able to just extend that just a little bit, but keep that in mind. If you have some thoughts that you wanted to share, if they're lengthy, just please, give those to us via an email or present those to us in another kind of a way, give us a call, that sort of thing. If you have some brief comments you'd like to make, we do welcome those. But very importantly, what we'd like to have is an opportunity for people to ask questions. Perhaps those are clarifying questions. Perhaps there's some things that you want to know if we've considered an idea you might have. Whatever it might be, we want to really have an opportunity to have questions asked this evening. I know one of the things that came up, I got a little text here from Christine and Eric who were monitoring social media. There was a comment made about, well, perhaps we could, that's one of the concepts, replace the J-pod. Does that mean we're getting rid of art? No, that does not mean we're getting rid of art. So we can stop that rumor immediately so it doesn't spread any farther. It would be part of a STEAM change there, and STEAM has art as a part of it. So just so we're clear about that. All right, let's start some questions. I will do my best to try to see the room and get around and get some people. So ask your question, and then we'll send it to the right person up here in the panel. We'll start right over here on the edge.
Thank you very much for presenting this plan. I just want to mention that my son has extreme pollen allergies, and it is really difficult in the spring to be in Pendale where there is no air conditioning. So I think we really need to look at our facilities. Nobody works here. Probably very few people work in a non-air conditioned environment. So some of these capital expenditure projects are really necessary, and we need to look at this. Of course, the price tag, I think that is really challenge. That's going to be a challenge. But some of these projects are really important. Thank you.
Okay, we're going to go back over here.
We did some quick math. At the $300,000 a year house assessment, it would cost the average homeowner $192 a year more to replace and fix up what we have. Anybody here not willing to spend $192 a year to help your kids?
All right, I'll grab this one before I head down.
Just a quick question about the stadium. How was the decision made to put $5.3 million into the stadium as opposed to, say, the baseball field and or the basketball stadium or court, which I think there's safety issues at both, especially in the basketball court, but I think our baseball facility is also severely lacking compared to our other school districts.
Okay, Scott or Steve, you want to tackle that one, or Jonathan, or any of the board members up there?
Testing. Yeah, is this on? Hello? I'm not sure if this mic works.
Yeah, you're on.
Can you hear me now? All right. Thank you. Just want to add some context that no decisions have been made. What we've done is we've at least explored what opportunities exist while being able to understand the timelines. It's also important to have some context as to how long it has been since any of these upgrades have been made. There are legitimate safety concerns besides ADA for our athletes as well as for the guests who are there. And this is about a whole student experience. This type of plan means, I believe if the numbers are correct, and most of us have probably seen that the football team has had to play elsewhere due to flooding issues, but it's about 215 opportunities for different teams, band front, everyone else to use this turf field versus what is now about 30. Is that correct, Scott?
Probably 15 events a year.
Okay. So currently, we're at about 15 events, and then some of them we have to go off-site, and we're trying to look at what the return on investment from the taxpayers, what that would be. It's not just for one team. So I just wanted to make sure that the context was added.
Okay, thank you. All right, I saw the hand here.
I don't need the microphone. I want to address the people. Okay. Thank you for having this forum brought together. The question I want you to realize is, what is going to happen when we have the retirement rate in the United States? There are going to be 80 million people retiring in about 15 more years. For myself, I've been retired. I don't pay Berkheimer. My wife is going to retire in 3 years. She's not going to pay Berkheimer. I'm moving to Florida. My house will be empty. Why? Because I can deduct the mortgage on the taxes. I'm not renting it. You're not going to get any. If you multiply this by Upper Gwinnett, Lower Gwinnett, and Montgomery Township, you could have 7,000 or 8,000 houses. Well, who lives here? No one lives here. They live in Florida, and they're borrowing money on it. Thank you.
Okay, we'll go over here.
I have a bunch of questions, so cut me off when you have had enough. So for the first part of the presentation, well, first I want to say thank you for bringing this together. I think it's very helpful that you guys are providing us the insights that you have tonight. So a couple questions I had from the first part of the presentation is, can you explain the process for prioritizing the projects, the process that you're implementing to continue to make sure that you have a 10-year project plan? Because obviously we can't do this once and then wait 10 years from now and do it again. And then I would expect that there's going to be new issues that arise, obviously, throughout this 10-year plan. So what process would you have in place to determine those in the priority listing for the 10-year plan, project plan? I guess knowing, businesses, you always do a long-range plan. So it's always an ongoing process. So I guess that's my first question is, how did we do that process? I have other questions, but okay. If we decide to do the 21st century renovations in any of the buildings, does it help grow revenue opportunities for the districts? Meaning, can you have community events come in and, help ensure that we are, minimizing potentially a deficit against our operating expenses, and it can actually add value to the district potentially so that we can continue to make improvements? And then I guess the other question I would have is, in the worst case debt scenario, what are we doing to ensure we're not operating in a deficit every year so that we continue to grow the general fund to ensure that, we can keep moving forward with. Long question.
Okay, we're going to go with Scott first on the 10-year plan, then we'll go to Dave just with a little bit of context in 21st century learning and anything else you've seen across the country, and then we'll go back to Steve for the third question. So Scott?
So the 10-year plan is broken down currently, the $63 million, into the first 5 years and the second 5 years. I think the more detailed prioritization will depend on the funding source. If we have $1 million a year, $500,000 a year, whatever that dollar amount is, then we'll prioritize in more detail. I consider the long-range plan as a living document. It's analyzed, reprioritized every year. So every fall, August, September, I think I would go to the board and say, can we do these projects next summer? This has changed. This has become more serious. We can wait a year on this. So it's a living document. I think those are the two questions about the 10-year plan.
Anything else you've seen across the country on the 21st century and the community using the facilities as a revenue source, that sort of thing?
Yeah, it's tough to really quantify the revenue source, but one of the big pieces is we're really trying to create buildings where you can segment off all those community spaces, the gymnasium, the cafeterias, the dining spaces from the rest of the educational space, so all of those can actually be rented out. An example is at NAP, that cafeteria is right in the center of a cluster of classrooms, so you're in the educational area to use that, which means if something's being done during the day, the classrooms are kind of invaded in a way. So that's what we're trying to do in all of the buildings we're doing, is separating off all of the community spaces so they can be used both day and night.
Okay, and Steve, if you want to take the third question, and Eric, I'm coming to you next then for online folks.
So I believe your question was, how do you balance the additional debt with the general fund to make sure that there's not a systemic budget imbalance? That's an excellent question. So there's definitely a balancing act there, and we do long-term fiscal forecasts and projections, and we have to have a situation where we're not drawing down that fund balance to levels that are very dangerous, because that affects a number of things. Number one, it affects our bond rating for future borrowings. That could lead to higher interest expense. So as part of the analysis with these projects, we will continuously do a balancing act to make sure that our fund balance stays at appropriate levels and kind of merge the debt in at appropriate times to make sure that we don't bring down that fund balance to levels that are not appropriate.
Okay, Eric, you want to give us a question from the folks that are watching through North Penn Television or through the online? Meanwhile, Julianne had something she wanted to add, so hold that question 1 second, Eric.
To also follow up to say that the 10-year plan is really the first step for us as a board and for this committee, for the Support Service Committee, and then making sure that it is linked to the work of the Finance Committee. And the Finance Committee of the board is a committee of the whole, so every single board member is a part of it. So we will really work to make sure that the things that are on that plan, as we're able to, we'll connect that back to the Finance Committee, make sure that it's linked to the budget. And then also, I really want to also second what Mr. Kennedy said about this being a living document. We know that things happen. And so making sure that looking at that 10-year plan, that we have systems and mechanisms for being able to update it every year and doing some reviews of it, but then also allowing things to be added as things come up. So this is the committee that will really work with the administration and work with the community to make sure that we're able to implement this, and we'll encourage you beyond this forum to stay connected and linked to us through that forum.
All right, thank you, Julianne. Eric, do you have a question? Meanwhile, I'm going to be working my way up this side, but we're going to go to folks that are watching through North Penn Television or Facebook Live.
Yeah, thank you. Our first question from the audience watching and messaging us online is in regards to the plan for public stadium renovations, and that is what Penn Youth is involved in and the plannings to which the equipment currently in the snack stands are owned by the local communities.
If the project moves forward, there'll be design development meetings when all interested parties, the sports teams, the band teams, will all be involved in the design process.
All right, in addition, another question we have online is, at $138 million to renovate the high school, wouldn't it be cheaper to just build a new building? That's one of the questions.
All right, Dave, you want to take a shot at what do 550,000 square foot buildings run nowadays? Can you find those somewhere?
Yes, so in a high school today, using today's numbers, you'd be between $275 and $300 a square foot times 550,000 square feet, plus site costs, plus soft costs. So you're already well up over $200 million by the time you built a new building.
Okay, I'm going to come over here. I have a hand up here.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for giving the presentation. I'm really looking forward to seeing the renovations that occur in North Penn School District. But I did have some questions in regards to one of the topics that was brought up about Knapp Elementary, in particular the modular units. I noticed we obviously have modular units at Penfield, Pembroke, I believe even some at Penndale. I might be mistaken about that. But they are older modular units. And there are issues with animals that go under the modular units, as well as mold and other factors. And as a parent of a child who is in the mods, and also someone who works in the mods, my question for you is this. When is there a plan to actually make those, instead of having temporary structures, more permanent structures for these middle schools? But also, I've noticed, and once again, speaking as a parent, if there's mold or something that occurs in any of these rooms, no notification is being sent out to parents. As a parent of a child with asthma, that concerns me. He's not going to come home, and he doesn't always carry his inhaler with him. So I really feel that that's something as a district, and I know from being in other districts that that's something that goes out automatically. And I was just curious as to why that's not something that's shared more often.
Okay, Scott, you want to talk a little bit about the protocols we follow?
Sure. This year we hired an environmental specialist who's on our team this year, which is a good addition to our staff. He's been helping us with any of the environmental issues, and Every time there's been a complaint, we've inspected, investigated the complaints. We haven't found mold growth to an extensive degree. There's been some small, tiny spots. We remediate immediately. We cut it out, remove it, and clean it, and we monitor the area. So we haven't had any outbreaks of mold to an extensive degree. We've had some tiny areas that we've dealt with, and having this new person on staff has been a big help for us as we move forward.
Okay, I see a hand over here. I'm going to come over here.
Kurt? Excuse me, Dr. Dietrich. I just wanted to, I'm sorry, Mr. Manera. Thank you for yielding. I also want to, as a parent as well with a child with asthma who is also in the mods, take it very seriously when we hear about these issues, and the administration has been doing what they can to remediate and report that to us. What I want to make clear, though, in the bigger picture is that it's 10 months now that, I believe 10 months I've been serving and chair of this support services committee. This really is our first step as a community to have a discussion we communicate, it's transparent, we share data, so we can be held accountable. It's very important for those of you in the audience and those watching to please further these conversations, be empowered with the information, and make sure that we continue to have discussions. What do we do with the mods as it relates to the other spend? What is the #1 priority versus what, to be quite honest, seems like about 24 priorities that we may have? So it's very important to understand that this is the first time in the beginning of what will be a legacy of a real 10-year strategic plan with some policies that back it up. We've had the status quo for a number of reasons, and the district has done a lot. Really want to make sure we commend the administration and those who take care of our buildings for getting so much out of them. It's really been a great return on investment. But we as a community can no longer think that the status quo is okay. Now it's to realize, well, we're 19 years into the 21st century. What can we do to make sure that the next 10 years has a plan? And it might not all come overnight. So thank you for the patience and for your feedback when you do provide it.
Okay, we're going to go here to Kevin.
All right, I'll be real quick. I'll send you my 5.5-minute speech on email so you guys can read it whenever you want. But I was just looking at a newspaper from November 12th, a reporter actually from November 12th, but it was from November 12th, 1971. And I have it in my hand right here. It's a beauty. 47-year-old newspaper from when the North Penn High School dedication took place. And on the dedication ceremony on November 14th, 1971, United States Senator Richard Schweiker said this: "When I was looking through the school booklet describing the school's programs of studies, I came across this quotation: 'Behold the turtle, he makes progress only when he sticks his neck out.' For in effect, this building, to me, says this community stands for education. We want to make progress in education. We're not afraid to stick our neck out to do it. Bricks and mortar alone are not going to produce education, but we can't produce education unless we have some bricks and mortar. Fortunately, in this school, you have the right combination of bricks and brains." It was 47 years ago when we were extremely proud of a state-of-the-art, brand new high school that was above industry standard, that had things that nobody else had. And now we have a presentation where we're looking at Phoenixville to look at examples of what an elementary school should look like. I think we need to stick our neck out and build a brand new Knapp Elementary School. To me, it doesn't make sense. If we're going to save a few million between Plan 2 and Plan 3, build Knapp Elementary School. But I don't teach in an elementary school. I don't have kids at Knapp Elementary School. I'm a high school teacher and coach. And I see a football stadium where if you are a senior citizen who is on a fixed income and you don't have extra money to spend on taxes, you also probably someday can't go to watch a football game because you can't walk up the bleachers. My man, Coach Crawford here, he runs circles around his cross-country team. But someday he might not be able to climb up the bleachers to the stadium that bears his last name. And so it's time to start to look at what changes have to happen to make these facilities ADA compliant, to make them usable by the whole community. And by the way, Mr. Patchell, when you do sell your house and move to Florida, the better our buildings are and the better structures we have and the more upgrades we make, the more money you're going to get for your house when you sell it. There are school districts that are very close to ours that people don't want to buy houses in because the school system is not good. So your property values won't be very high if nobody wants to move there. But if you live on Gettysburg or Norway or Yorktown and your kids go to Knapp and you have a state-of-the-art first-class elementary school right down the street, people will want to buy your house someday. So we're all going to benefit if we just stick our neck out a little bit And that number about what it's going to cost per year, well, it's going to cost maybe even less than that if your house isn't $300,000. Imagine about $9 a month over the course of the next 22 years. I think there's a lot of ways for us to find $9 a month. Eric Jessberger over there, who's wearing a suit, he's a junior at North Penn High School. He's a student athlete. He writes for the newspaper. He's for North Penn TV. He is a perfect example of what Mr. Costa said, which is educating the whole child. We will do that with the best buildings and the best programs we have, even if it costs us $10 a month for the next 22 years.
Okay. Eric, do we have another one online?
Yeah, something similar to what was mentioned. How much of the $5 million of the stadium project are required ADA upgrades versus enhancements?
Look that up. There's several line items. The one item is $365,000. There's some walkways, they're another $130,000. And some other numbers that aren't broken out, it has to do with some of the stadium seating modifications. You can provide ADA seating, companion seating. So those are two of the line items that are broken out, but some more of the ADA issues may be buried in some of the other costs. So it's at least a few $100,000.
Okay, thank you for that. I saw this hand.
If I might add to that, as well, especially being on the Safe Schools Committee as well, there's not only the ADA access and the ability, for egress. If you really look at the stadium now and those improvements, it's going to improve the safety standards, which really brings us into the 21st century as well. That's very important for us to look at with those type of costs. And when you also look at the bathroom facilities, could we at least just, what's the statistic on that right now? How many bathrooms do we have at Crawford?
I think there's 4 female fixtures, maybe 3 male fixtures. And the code requires close to 50 or 60.
And so the code, could you please list?
Sure, I don't know the exact numbers, but I think the code requires closer to 50 or 60 male and female fixtures, meaning toilets or bathroom facilities. And we have 3 and 4 in our 2 existing buildings.
So those, I just want to make sure we grasp that. This community discussion is about what we need, not simply what we want. I'm sorry to take your time.
My name's Alexis. My 2 children attend Knapp Elementary currently. They have suffered from health issues since they started there, and I just want to thank you all for actually listening to us when we complained about the conditions at that school. My kids may never get to see the renovation. They might be out before it's done, but I can rest easy at night knowing that every child that is going to go into that school is going to be going into a safe environment. And I'm very happy to hear all the wonderful comments from the people tonight who have been in support of the renovation at NAB. It's very needed.
Okay, we are at 8:33, but we're going to extend here just a little bit so we can get a few more people. I see some hands in the back here. I'll come back here. But if you could be brief and succinct, it would be helpful.
Thank you all. Mr. Monero, I second what you say. As a graduate of North Penn in 90, a brother of a graduate in 84, and a brother of a graduate in 79, our stadium needs to be done. It not only helps all the kids that are in the high school, but the kids that are in the middle school, the kids that are in the elementary school that play sports. I don't know if any of you have parents that are on the high school level, but during lacrosse season last year, a text comes out. We're not going to practice till 8 o'clock because that's the only time we can get on the field. I had a 9th grader taking him up there at 8 o'clock for practice to be over at 10 o'clock. We had 2 turf fields. At least he could have got there at 6 o'clock. We need to expand our turf fields for all of our field sport-based teams, including our band.
Thank you. Right here.
Hi, I'm a total fan of public schools, and I do want to have the renovations both at the high school and at Knapp, but I'd like to get a portfolio view. We talked a little bit about Penndale, but that wasn't included in the numbers, and if it's going to require 20-year municipal bonds with that kind of sustained debt for 20 years, can we at least get a broad brush view across all 13 schools as to what other big multi-million-dollar projects might be in that further period out, so we're not looking at another step up 10 years from now?
Okay, thank you for that comment. As was stated earlier, the Finance Committee will be reviewing finances extensively in their committee meetings. I'll go here.
Hi, I'm Lori Schofield from Pembroke. I do have some issues, and I'm kind of feeling like the 18th of 18 children, because there's a lot of issues with our mods, and I know that's already been talked about, but they're 30 years old. And the issues are, and there's 22 classrooms there. So I really would like to see if we could, and I agree with the woman who just spoke, there are so many projects, and I know I'm thinking, well, can we possibly get into the capital fund? Are we going to make it in the next round? And I just needed to know what does that look like for all of the issues that we're facing? And particularly, I am, on my own little home here, 22 classrooms that there's issues all the time, and that something as clear as, could we just do air quality in each classroom to see if the test is needed and what else needs to happen? Could we rip up the very mildewy rugs and make sure that there's just a floor there? Is there any way that we can take a look at the ramps so that our children who are motorized wheelchairs do have access to leave? And then third, how are we included in that fourth-year plan? And second to that, when you talk about ADA access, I use a walker, and I can't get into any building. There's not handicap accessibility with just a plank or whatever you call them, like theirs at the ESC. So I know that there are places that have both the access and security. And as somebody who comes in every day, I just don't have access to my building unless somebody happens to be there to hold the door open for me. So if we're talking about ADA, and lastly, when you talk about ADA at Crawford Stadium, please make sure that there's enough parking spaces that are close to that. So my access is all about getting myself actually there, but I'd like to get there, if that makes sense to everybody. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Anna Lee. I'm from the North Penn High School, and I'm here representing my environmental club, ENACT. The school district has made many great efforts on trying to make this school district a more sustainable place. And as you plan to make more green renovations, please note that the ENACT Club is willing to be a resource. And by reducing our waste and energy consumption, these renovations can hopefully save us a lot of money and can make us environmental leaders in our community. So we would love to help.
Thank you. Do appreciate the work of the ENACT Club. Any other final thoughts before we close down for the night? I see a hand right here. Go ahead, Tina.
Here. Thank you. One of our goals when we ran was to be more open and transparent with the community. So that is why we are having these forums. We had one in April for safe schools. We're having the one tonight for this topic, facilities, and then we're going to have one in 2 weeks for diversity and cultural proficiency. And I think this goes a long way to, fulfilling our promise to be open and transparent. This is all projects, none of them have been approved yet, and when you speak to prioritizing, that's what's in front of us, that's what we're going to have to decide. So we're going to be having more forums in the future for everybody to come back and, see how we progress from there. So there'll be more updates as we go along. So I just want everybody to be aware of that. And I really appreciate everybody coming out tonight. I think it's been a really good turnout, and appreciate everybody doing their bit for making the presentation. So it's a community effort. It's all of our schools. So we want to make sure that we have everybody's input into doing that. So thank you.
Okay. We're going to take 2 more. I see a hand right here.
To what degree was solar energy considered with the North Penn and the Penndale upgrades or rebuilds?
Yeah, so there's no specific systems determined at this point. I can tell you that we've had some good fortune in, for instance, Council Rock School District getting some of the state grants that are allowing us to put photovoltaics on the roof. So as you begin to decide, even on which projects you're doing, and we begin to work them backwards as to what you can afford within that, we'll both look at grants and we will look at how many of the sustainable systems we can put into them, and we'll find a good mix of everything for those.
This is for Tina Stoll. As a lifelong North Penn football fan, on a lighter note, I've been to new facilities where they look great, and then you get in the stands, and I can't see the football players because you're so far away from the field. I like all the upgrades, all the ideas, blah, blah, blah. But you said you're going to increase the track. Is the track going to be increased towards the football field or towards the stands?
I think that's more a question for Scott.
Actually, the plans are a little more complicated. It's a little difficult to summarize everything, but the variance we got was to move the bleachers closer to the Votech school, to bring some handicapped accessibility from behind those bleachers, and then we can put in an 8-lane track. When you redo the whole thing, you are coming closer to the Votech school, if you can kind of envision that. The home field side doesn't change, where it'll be just creeping a little more towards like the sidelines of the football field. The concourse goes around the back to be able to access those stands there. But we'll get into more of that, as we get further and further into the whole thing. Okay, I see a hand here.
Hi, thank you. I'm glad to have time. I know you had mentioned I'm a proud teacher here at Pembroke about being patient, but I just have to say I started working here in 1997. Within a few years, I was sick all the time. Brought a note in from my doctor that the mold was making me ill. I was told by my former principal when I contacted the school board not to do so. If you Google Pembroke Modulars 2003, you can pull up the articles. We begged and begged. People running for school board came out and took pictures of the mold. We gave them our doctor's notes that we were getting sick. And unfortunately, we know that the plan was made to renovate Pembroke in 2007 without air conditioning, without replacing the modulars. So when we all saw the plan that in the next 10 years, Pembroke and Penfield were still being ignored, it was like a sucker punch. Because I'm going to start my very proud career here in Pembroke, and I'm going to retire, and those portable classrooms are still sitting there. So I think we've all been patient. I don't teach in the mods anymore, but I now watch my colleagues who are in there who are sick all the time. I'm now not on any medicine, and I'm completely healthy. We had a meeting 2 months ago, and we still haven't had any answers. I'm going to disagree with how some of the things have been taken care of, because we paint over things. We don't get the results out. So for those of us that have been advocating for the health of our children and for ourselves, I'm pushing 22 years that I've been trying to get somebody to listen. So I'm going to retire. I'm not working in the mods anymore, but I'm really concerned about the children that go here. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I said 2, but I saw Elena's hand, so I'm going to give Elena a shot here yet, and then we'll wrap.
I just want to first and foremost say thank you, you guys. Thank you for being transparent. Thank you for listening to us, hearing us. I first and foremost, $20 a month. Let's do it. Let's better the education for the children all around. There's nothing but better things to come. Thank you for looking at facilities as a whole. Thank you for doing a 10-year project and not just band-aiding things like it's previously been for. We need to do this correctly. Thank you. But again, to my whole big spiel, where's all the air conditioning? Pembroke, Penfield, Pendale. Major safety and health concerns for our children. ESC. Is there students in the ESC building? We're looking at spending $5 million at the ESC building when that can be part of the air conditioning for these 3 buildings. You're sending kids home because it's so hot in these buildings. That's their education. They're being sent home. They're not getting that education. Let's relook at the air conditioning. I know it's not this current board, the prior board. When I started this whole issue, we will do elementary schools, and the next year we will do the middle schools. That promise went right down the drain by that board. Again, I know it's not you guys. I know it was the prior board. Something seriously needs to be done about that. Thank you.
Okay, the next support services meeting and the next finance meeting both occur on the same evening. They're on Monday, November 26th. So I do encourage you to come to those committee meetings. They're held in the ESC. Do appreciate everyone's participation this evening. As was stated earlier, we thought it would be a great opportunity to have a meeting at a larger venue, to have an opportunity for input. But please, don't just come tonight. Continue to be involved. Come to those committee meetings and continue to have your voice be heard. Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your evening.